So now we're continuing in the Book of Prayer, level 3. We discussed, our broad topic is prayer times. We've been in the prayer times for several weeks now. And we're just moving nice and slowly, slower than I usually go. We covered all the we covered 4 prayer times out of 5. We still didn't cover the Fajr prayer. I mean, we did cover all the 5 prayer times because we went over the hadith of how Jibreel alayhi salam taught the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam the prayer times. But then we started going over each prayer time one by one in detail. And we covered 4 of those out of 5. Fajr prayer still needs to be explained. But before we get to that, we have a digression here about combining and shortening prayers. The author says there are rules pertaining to these 4 prayers. So not including Fajr prayer. The rules we want to discuss now don't include the Fajr prayer. So that's why we're not discussing, that's why we're discussing this now before getting to Fajr prayer. Except sunset prayer sometimes. The rules we want to discuss, they cover these 4 prayers. And sunset prayer, Maghrib prayer, is not included in some of this. Because Maghrib prayer is not a 4-fold prayer, a ruba'iyah, so you can't shorten it. You can't shorten Maghrib prayer. So what we want to talk about as far as shortening is concerned does not pertain to Maghrib prayer. The author says, for someone living far from the place of prayer, like he doesn't live right next door to the masjid, for example. And far doesn't mean like he lives in another city or something. But if he wants to go out to pray, then he has to, for example, walk for a little bit before he gets to the masjid. For someone living far from the place of prayer here, that means masjid or musalla, in a downpour of rain or snow. So he's far from the masjid and there's a downpour. Now, so that means if he wanted to go to the masjid, he's going to get soaked. In a downpour of rain or snow that soaks the clothing. So not like regular rain, not like a gentle rain, not like a drizzle. Even sometimes the rain is more than a drizzle, but it doesn't soak your clothing. Soak, means like saturate, thoroughly wet. At the beginning and end of the first prayer. So there's a downpour at the beginning of Dhuhr prayer and at the end of Dhuhr prayer. So what's not included there? When we say at the beginning and end of the prayer, what's not included there? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, that's Zuhr or Asr. The Maghrib is not included, or if it's Zuhr, the Zuhr is not included to shorten. Is that what you mean?
No. The beginning of the prayer and the end of the prayer. So what's not mentioned here? The middle of the prayer. We're talking about rain here. So for someone living far from the place of prayer, in a downpour of rain or snow, a downpour that soaks the clothing at the beginning of the first prayer, that's going to be Dhuhr with Asr, or Maghrib with Isha. And at the end of this first prayer, so the beginning of Dhuhr, it's raining hard, and at the end of Dhuhr, it's raining hard. Or the beginning of Maghrib, it's raining hard, and the end of Maghrib, it's raining hard. So when we say the beginning and the end, what's missing here? The middle. So even if it stopped in the middle. If it's raining hard at the beginning of Dhuhr prayer and the end of Dhuhr prayer, or the beginning of Maghrib prayer and the end of Maghrib prayer, a downpour that soaks the clothing at the beginning and end of the first prayer and at the beginning of the second prayer. So the second prayer is going to be Asr, because Dhuhr and Asr go together. Yani, we already stated that up above. So it's not here. That fact is not here under this title. But it's repeated up above that Dhuhr and Asr go together, and Maghrib and Isha go together. So for someone living far from the place of prayer in a downpour that soaks the clothing at the beginning and end of the first prayer, that's going to be Dhuhr with Asr, or Maghrib with Isha. And at the beginning of the second prayer, that's going to be Asr, so it's still raining hard at the beginning of the Asr prayer. And what we mean here is you brought the Asr forward. So the first rule we're discussing here is the fact that you can combine prayers for rain because of heavy rain. So, but you can only bring the later prayer forward. You cannot delay the earlier prayer. You cannot delay the earlier prayer to the later prayer time when it comes to rain. For rain, you can only advance the second prayer to the time of the first prayer. So right now we're talking about praying Asr at Dhuhr time or praying Isha at Maghrib time because of the heavy rain. So Dhuhr is the first prayer and the Asr is the second prayer. And Maghrib is the first prayer and Isha is the second prayer. For someone living far from the place of prayer, in a downpour that soaks the clothing, a downpour at the beginning and end of the first prayer, which is Dhuhr with Asr, or Maghrib with Isha. And at the beginning of the second prayer, which is Asr with the Dhuhr. Asr is the second prayer with Dhuhr at Dhuhr time. And Isha, that's the second prayer with Maghrib at Maghrib time. So it's raining heavily at the beginning of Dhuhr and at the end of Dhuhr and at the beginning of Asr during the Dhuhr time. Or it's raining heavily at the beginning of Maghrib prayer and at the end of the Maghrib prayer, and then you're going to stand up to pray Isha, and it's still raining hard at the beginning of that Isha prayer. It is permissible to pray the noon and afternoon prayers as a set, together. As well as the sunset and nightfall prayers, you can pray both of them as a set. But only in the earlier time of each respective set. So you can only pray Asr at Dhuhr time for this heavy rain, or pray Isha at Maghrib time for this heavy rain in congregation and in the place of congregation. That's why it's significant to say he lives far from the place of prayer, because doing this set, praying these two prayers as a set, has to be done in the place of congregation, and actually in congregation with those who intended. Those who intended means when it's raining heavy, basically you're going to say, the Muslims are going to say, "Oh Muslims, it's raining heavily now and we are in the place of congregation. So let us bring the Asr prayer forward and pray the Asr at Dhuhr time, in this Dhuhr time now." So when you say Allahu Akbar, make the intention to bring Asr forward. And so then everyone who made this intention is going to be able to stand up after saying the salam of dhuhr, and then pray asr if it's still raining. If it was raining heavily at the end of dhuhr and still raining heavy when you stand up to say Allahu Akbar for asr. Because Muslim narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam joined noon prayer with afternoon prayer, and he joined sunset prayer with nightfall prayer in Medina without traveling. He did that not for traveling and without fear. So Imam Ash-Shafi'i, may Allah raise his rank, deduced that this was for downpour.
Right?
Yes,
I have a question.
yes.
What do you mean by the beginning of the second prayer?
It means when you stand up, so let's say we're talking about Dhuhr and Asr.
Okay.
So Asr is the second prayer, so it's raining heavily. At the end of the first prayer, which is Dhuhr, you said your salam, it's raining heavily. So then you all stood up, and then you said Allahu Akbar to pray Asr at Dhuhr time, and it's still raining heavily.
I understood that part. But you say at the beginning of the second prayer. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, the beginning of the second prayer. When you say, huh?
Yeah, if it is Asr time already, what do you combine?
No, it doesn't work like that. Only advancing. Only advancing Asr to Dhuhr time.
Maybe my understanding is not very good. I understood at the beginning and the ending the first still which is falling.
Yes.
And bring it forward. But you said also at the beginning of the second prayer.
Yes, at the beginning of the second prayer that you brought forward.
Okay. You are not waiting till the second ending.
No, because you cannot delay.
Yes. Okay. That was my.
Amin wa fikum. So even if you made the intention to bring Asr forward because it's raining heavily at Dhuhr time, but if the rain stopped before you finished Dhuhr, you can't pray Asr. So it's a condition that it's raining heavily at the beginning of Dhuhr so that you could even make the intention to bring Asr forward. And that it's still raining heavily when Dhuhr finishes, and then you're going to stand up to pray Asr because you made the intention, and it's still raining heavily. That's the meaning of at the beginning of the second prayer. If the rain stopped, then you can't pray Asr at Dhuhr time, even if you already intended. The author says, however, some Shafi'i scholars permitted joining prayers for sickness. Sickness that distracts from the reverence for God means sickness that its pain distracts you from feeling reverence for God while you pray. And while you pray, all you can think of is your pain. Some Shafi'i scholars said, if your sickness is this strong, then you can also pray prayers in sets, advancing or delaying. So you could pray Dhuhr at Asr time, or pray Asr at Dhuhr time. Or you could pray Maghrib at Isha time, or pray Isha at Maghrib time for this strong sickness. Not just open for you to pray it advanced or delayed when you want. Rather, whenever the sickness is lighter, which is going to be your estimation because you can't really know, you don't know the future. But you might have a clue, or you might have a hunch, yani you might be able to feel in yourself that it's probably going to get worse from here. Or you might say, all I need to do is rest a little and I'll probably feel a little bit lighter. For example, so if he's so strongly sick at Dhuhr time, according to this saying, and this is not a consensus, that's why I say some Shafi'i scholars permit it. Not all of them, this is not a consensus that you can advance or delay prayers because of sickness. according to saying that you can, then you're going to advance or delay depending on whenever the sickness is lighter in your estimation. So if you think it's going to get lighter, if it's, let's say, Dhuhr time, and you say, SubhanAllah, I feel so bad. Every footstep hurts me. I think, though, it would be easier for me to pray Dhuhr at Asr time, and I'm going to rest now. Then according to them, you can do that. Or you might say, I think it's just going to get worse from here. Let me pray Asr now at Dhuhr time so that I can rest, for example. And same thing for Maghrib and Isha. So advancing or delaying to pray a set whenever the sickness is lighter. If one believes that the sickness will stay constant, then he must pray regularly. He doesn't have this permission anymore. It is permissible for a walking or sailing traveler, even a disbeliever who converts during the trip. And not a wanderer, though. A wanderer is a person who doesn't have any destination. Though one does not have to intend a shortening distance. It is permissible for a walking or sailing traveler of a lawful journey. A lawful journey of 2 daytimes without night, one way. Or 2 nights without day. Or a complete day and night, including downtime in all cases, beyond the city wall, to pray each set in their respective earlier or later times. What does this mean? It is permissible for a traveler, whether this traveler is walking or sailing. Sailing here includes flying. Yani, you're a walking traveler, or you're riding in a car, or a boat, or a plane. Then you could pray with all the conditions fulfilled, Dhuhr at Asr time or Asr at Dhuhr time. Or you could pray Maghrib at Isha time or Isha at Maghrib time. So it's permissible for a walking or sailing traveler. Even a disbeliever who converts during the trip. Meaning, a person was a kafir and he's traveling. Let's say he's traveling with some Muslims. And then while on the road, he embraces Islam. So now he's a traveling Muslim and he has to pray. So is he allowed to delay? Can he advance and delay his prayers? Yes, he can. This is an important detail for you because what did we learn? Didn't we learn that you cannot, you don't have the permissions of a traveler if your travel is a sinful travel? Yes. But what if you repent during the trip? Then you will get all your permissions. Maybe that detail's been missing you for years. Maybe you thought, just because I started my travel, a haram travel, then khalas, there's no way for me here. There is a way for you, which is to repent. Repent from the sin and be traveling lawfully, not sinfully. And then you will have the permissions of a traveler. Not a wanderer, though. This doesn't apply to a wanderer because the wanderer is a person who doesn't even have any destination. Although a person does not have to intend a shortening distance. What does that mean? Meaning, it's just a condition for you to actually have traveled a shortening distance. Which I'm going to repeat for you now what that distance is. It's not a condition that you said beforehand, I intend to go a shortening distance, or I now intend to travel. This is not a condition. It's just a condition to actually be traveling, or on a journey if you want. If you are traveling or on a journey, and you fulfilled all the conditions, then you have the permissions of a traveler. That's important detail also, because a lot of brothers and sisters think you need to have an intention. It's like they think you have to say, I now intend to travel. So that's not a condition. So one does not have to intend a shortening distance in order to be able to do what we're talking about here. He can't be a wanderer, though. The wanderer is the one who doesn't have a destination. So it's permissible for a walking or sailing traveler, Yani, it's permissible for a traveler of a lawful journey. Lawful means any of the judgments except haram. There's 5 judgments. So if it's not haram trip, then you have the permissions of a traveler. If it's obligatory trip, if it's recommended trip, if it's indifferent trip, in all these cases, as long as it's not haram and you fulfill all the conditions, then you have the permissions of a traveler or a journeyer, if you want. So, how far is this shortening distance? A journey, yani, in summary, a journey of 2 days. So it could be said right here, a 2-day distance. That's the famous saying in the Shafi'i school, but it wasn't said that way here just for the benefit, so that you understand what does 2 days mean. A journey of 2 daytimes without night, one way, that's the 2-day distance. 2 daytimes without night going one way, that's a 2-day walking distance. Whether we talk about walking on foot as a human being or even riding a camel. 2-day walking distance, that means 2 daytimes without nighttime and one way only. How far is that? That's the journey. That distance is what allows you what gives you the permissions of a traveler. As soon as you get out of the town, it's not a condition that you go that far first. It's just that you have to be going that far. So 2 daytimes without night one way, or 2 nights without day one way. That's a 2-day walking distance. Or a complete day and night nonstop. That's a 2-day walking distance. The speed, though, doesn't matter. It's the distance that matters, not the speed. And this 2-day walking distance includes downtime, including downtime in all cases. Downtime means the time you need to pray, to eat, to rest, to use the bathroom. Beyond the city wall, that's if your city had a wall. If your city had a wall, and then when you get out of the wall, when you get out of the city, yani, out of the wall, and you're going to go that far, then as soon as you get out of the wall, get to the outside of the wall, you're a traveler. You have the permissions of a traveler. If your city doesn't have a wall, then you have to get out of the city. That means you need to reach the point where the buildings stop. You need to reach the point where the buildings stop. That doesn't mean you need to. That doesn't mean that if there's 2 townships right across the street from each other, once you cross the street to the other township, you're a traveler now. No. If you had 2 townships right across the street from each other, those are like one town. If you had several townships or boroughs, all of them connected without any gap in between them, then all of that is like one town. So once you get out of the town, when you reach the point where the buildings stop, and you're going to go as far as we have mentioned, then you're a traveler. You have the permissions of a traveler, as long as all the conditions are fulfilled. So, it is permissible for a traveler of a lawful journey of 2 days, a 2-day walking at least, one way, who got beyond the city wall. It's permissible for him to pray each set. So you know what the sets are. Dhuhr and Asr is a set, and Maghrib and Isha are a set. You can pray each set in their respective earlier or later times. So this traveler then, he can pray Dhuhr at Asr time, or Asr at Dhuhr time. And he can pray Maghrib at Isha time, or Isha at Maghrib time. And which is better? Advance or delay? Is it better to bring the later prayer forward, or to delay the earlier prayer to the later time? There are details to this sought from the unabridged books, yani the bigger books. And the source of this is what was reported by Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He said, I went out with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam for the invasion of Tabuk, and he combined Dhuhr and Asr and sunset and nightfall prayers. He delayed the prayer one day, then he came out and prayed noon and afternoon prayers together. Then he went in, and then he came out and prayed sunset and nightfall prayers together. Advancing the later prayer to the earlier time requires intending advancement during the valid first prayer. Yani you want to pray the later prayer at the time of the earlier one. The first one, the earlier one, has to be valid. If it's not valid, it's not going to be valid for you to advance the later prayer. So it has to be a valid prayer in the first place, the earlier one. You have to intend the advancement and intend to bring the later prayer forward during the valid first prayer. Anytime during the prayer, even while saying the salam, but not before the prayer. So if it's Dhuhr time and you want to pray Asr at Dhuhr time, you cannot intend, yani it's not valid to intend to bring Asr forward to Dhuhr time and you didn't even start praying Dhuhr yet. So it has to be during the prayer. And also, advancing the later prayer to the earlier time requires observing the order between them. So you have to pray the Dhuhr first and then pray the Asr, since you're going to pray Asr at Dhuhr time. Because the second prayer is a follower, and a follower cannot precede the leader. How are you going to be the follower and you're in front? Thus, had one started with the second prayer, so he started praying Asr and he didn't pray Dhuhr, it is invalid. And it must be repeated after the first. So if he prayed Asr and then he prayed Dhuhr at Dhuhr time, that Asr is not valid and he's going to have to repeat it after he prayed the Dhuhr prayer. And advancing the later prayer to the earlier time also requires praying the second prayer after the first prayer sooner than the time needed for 2 short rak'ats. Sooner than the time needed for 2 short rak'ats. Like, you pray Dhuhr, you stand up, you make Iqamah, and then you pray Asr. That's shorter than 2 short rak'ats. Or else, if you wait longer than that, then the later prayer must be delayed to its own time, even with an excuse, like forgetting. Like you forgot to pray right away. You prayed Dhuhr, you intended to bring Asr forward, you said Salam for Dhuhr, and then you forgot to start your Asr right away. So then you remember, after it's too late, after too much time passed, you remember, say, oh, I didn't pray the Asr that I wanted to pray. Khalas, you missed it. Now you have to wait. So even with an excuse like forgetting or fainting or some other excuse, you still won't be able to pray the Asr at Dhuhr time if you wait too long after finishing Dhuhr. Same thing for Maghrib and Isha. And if someone doubts the distance, he makes an ijtihad. This sentence here looks like needs to go here. Here. So I'll just read that really quick here. Let's see how that flows. It is permissible for a walking or sailing traveler, even a disbeliever who converts during the trip, but not a wanderer, though one does not have to intend a shortening distance. A walking or sailing traveler of a lawful journey of 2 daytimes without night one way, or 2 nights without day, or a complete day and night, including downtime in all cases, beyond the city wall, so this traveler got outside the city wall, it's permissible for him to pray each set in their respective earlier or later times. You know what that means. If one doubts the distance, he makes an ijtihad. That's good.
Right?
Yes.
One doesn't need meditation if one is overthinking.
Can you repeat, please?
One doesn't need a meditation to make. For example, if he's praying Zuhr and he wants to bring forward us while praying Zuhr, he has to make an intention to bring it forward, the us, isn't it?
Yes, that's true.
You mentioned that.
Yes, I did. It says right here, advancing the later prayer to the earlier time requires intending advancement during the valid first prayer. Even while saying the salam, even if he made the intention while saying the salam, that's valid. Yani he's saying the salam for dhuhr, and while he's saying the salam, he intends to bring asr forward, that's valid. But not before the prayer itself. Ameen wa fikum. And he has to observe the order between those two prayers when he prays the later prayer in the earlier time. And he has to pray that second prayer, the later prayer, after the first prayer, sooner than the time needed for 2 short rak'ats. So I think that's clear. If you have a question, please feel free.
I have a question, Shahid.
Yes.
Like when you're praying Maghrib, there is a certain zikr that you do,
Yes.
which is 10 times.
Yes.
Sharif was explaining this one, he said it's better not to make up that zikr because you said you have a couple of minutes or whatever to bring, for example, if you bring forward the Isha, one zikr Maghrib, according to the way how he explains, there is no gap. Even you can't make 10 zikr. Does it mean the time that you express less than that between those two?
The time it takes to do those 10 statements after Maghrib,
Yes.
that's tight. Yani, I can't tell you definitively that it's longer, but avoid that so that you don't fall into something.
That's why I want to make a for myself.
I mean, wafikum, but the sheikhs told us, the Sheikh Abdullah, because of his being, yani, he adhered to this dhikr so much that he would actually just not bring Isha forward.
Correct.
He would pray Maghrib and then do that dhikr 10 times and then pray Isha later. No. هكذا. The third condition is to pray the later prayer in the earlier time is to pray the second prayer after the first one sooner than the time needed for 2 short rak'ats, or else it must be delayed to its own time, that later prayer, even with an excuse like forgetting or fainting or other things. Now, to pray a set in the later time, so that means to pray Dhuhr at Asr time or to pray Maghrib at Isha time, it is merely obligatory to intend to delay within a time of the first prayer that is enough to contain that current prayer, shortened or not, so not to commit a major sin of praying late. Meaning, if you want to pray Dhuhr at Asr time, you have to make the intention to delay Dhuhr until Asr time. And when do you make this intention? You make that intention during the Dhuhr time, sometime during Dhuhr time. Even all the way at the end of the Dhuhr time, as long as you make that intention at a time that's enough for you to fit the entire prayer inside of its time. Same thing, if you want to delay Maghrib until Isha, then you have to make the intention to delay the Maghrib sometime during Maghrib time, even at the end of the Maghrib time, as long as you make that intention at a time that would enable you to fit the entire prayer inside of its time. Now, what if you didn't do that? Someone might say, well, if I didn't do it, that means I'm going to pray Dhuhr at Asr time anyway. So what's the issue here? The issue is, if you don't make this intention, then you're going to fall into the major sin of praying late without an excuse. You don't want to pray late without an excuse. In order to keep the excuse and not be sinful, you have to make the intention. The intention to delay, like how I mentioned for you. Then it is not obligatory, Yani. Then means, so if you did delay that Dhuhr until Asr time, or you delayed that Maghrib until Isha time, it is not obligatory to observe the order. So you could pray the Asr before the Dhuhr or the Isha before the Maghrib when you delayed to the later time. Nor is it obligatory to pray the second prayer immediately after the first, because now you're praying in the later time. Rather, both of those two cases are merely recommended. So I say we should stop here. I was hoping we could cover combining and shortening today, but our time is just about up, and I'm looking ahead here. All this is about shortening. I don't know how long it's going to take us to cover. So let's stop here. And then next week, if Allah enables us, we will read about shortening. And then after that, we'll get back on track and we'll read about the dawn prayer. And then we'll move on from there. Insha'Allah ta'ala. Do you have any question I can answer for you? طيب. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
For the Asr prayer, right?
Yes.
You do the 4 sunnah prayers before it or after?
The Asr prayer, the sunnahs for Asr are before Asr.
Okay, before Asr. Okay.
Yes. But if you miss them, you can make them up and still do them after.
So you can do it after?
You can, but their proper time is before. If you do it after, it's going to be makeup.
Okay, that's okay. All right. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khairan, Shaykhana al-Kareem.
آمين وإياكم. بارك الله فيكم. سبحان الله وبحمده. الله يرحمنا. آمين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.